Ryo's a pathetic loser who got hit by the great Truck-kun himself, and guess what? Got reborn in a world of magic. He just wanted a quiet, low-key life, but ended up with that clearly rigged by God level of overpowered cheat magic and became the strongest wizard on the planet. It all kicks off with Ryo waking up out of nowhere in a blank white void, with zero clue what's going on. While he's still trying to piece things together, a tall blonde guy shows up and, cool as a cucumber, breaks the news that Ryo's already dead. That's when it hits him, Truck-kun, totally lost. Ryo asks if the guy's God, but the dude says he's more like an angel. His job is shipping people off to new worlds. Ryo just stands there frozen, but the angel promises the next life can be exactly what he wants. Since Ryo's the chill, low-maintenance type, he asks for a simple life with zero stress. The angel's cool with that and explains that in this new world, magic exists, but only about 20% of the population can actually use it. Ryo gets handed water magic and gets dropped off at a protected cabin tucked away in the middle of a forest. The place is stocked with 2 months' worth of food and has an invisible barrier keeping monsters out. The second he wakes up inside, he's already testing out his powers. Inside the house, he finds frozen meat, an empty bathtub, a knife, and 2 basic books about the local plants and monsters. Outside, he discovers he can summon water just by thinking about it. No incantations needed. He wants a nice hot bath, but the water he makes comes out room temperature, nothing special. So he tries rubbing sticks together for fire, which gets him absolutely nowhere. It's only once he gets smarter about it that he freezes water into a lens, uses sunlight through it, and finally gets a fire going. Later, he even figures out he can make hot water directly if he mixes in a little logic and science with the magic. The next morning, munching on dried meat, Ryo realizes he can't live off stockpiled food forever. If he wants to survive out there, he's going to need some actual offensive power. First, he practices by lobbing water balls at a tree. He hits the target fine, just 0 real damage. Then he tries a pressurized water jet, but it comes out so weak it's almost embarrassing. Still, he remembers what the angel told him. Imagination and practice are the keys. So he keeps grinding until his water shots start landing with more precision. After that, he moves on to ice attacks too. Since he's always wanted to fire off sharp icicles, like those flashy anime spells, and that's way harder than water, he pushes through and slowly gets better. As time passes, Ryo keeps leveling up with both water and ice. One day he finally pushes deeper into the forest hunting for food. Things start out calm until he spots a wild boar glaring him down. The beast charges and Ryo barely dodges in time. After watching it demolish a tree, he forces himself to fight back. He freezes the ground in front of the boar, making it slip, then throws down a row of sharp icicles in its path. The boar slams straight into them and drops dead instantly. That night, Ryo checks his monster guide and learns boars are actually one of the weakest monsters out there. That's when he notices 2 extra entries in the book. One warns about dragons, strong enough to level entire cities, and best avoided at all costs. The other is about demons, being so mysterious and dangerous that just running into one basically means death. Ryo realizes just how massive and deadly this world really is, and decides he needs to get strong, fast. The next day he heads out again and runs into a killer hawk. He narrowly dodges its first strike, and learns the thing can launch invisible wind blades. Knowing a head-on fight is a losing bet, he runs while throwing up ice blocks behind him as cover and blasting water backward. Nothing connects. When the hawk dives again, Ryo throws up an ice wall right on time. The hawk slams straight into it, loses an eye, and finally backs off. After escaping, Ryo gets lost and stumbles onto a glowing lake. Standing on top of the water is a headless knight next to a headless horse. The sight leaves him frozen, but somehow he makes it back to the cabin alive. He keeps training after that and takes on increasingly tougher monsters. Eventually, he heads back to the lake at night and finds the headless knight waiting for him. Since the books say absolutely nothing about Dullahans or headless riders, Ryo can't tell if this thing is some rare monster or something else entirely. Still, he challenges it. Wielding an ice sword, Ryo tries to land a hit, but can't even touch the knight. Instead, he takes a beating, desperately blocking with an ice shield until he collapses from exhaustion. The knight doesn't finish him off, though. Instead, it walks over with a small crystal knife, coats it in water, freezes it into an ice sword, and hands it to Ryo. He immediately understands. The knight is teaching him a technique he needs to master. Not long after, Ryo runs into the killer hawk again, except now it's evolved and gotten even deadlier. Its wind attacks hit harder, and his ice walls barely hold up. He keeps backing off and trying to block until the hawk unleashes a sonic boom that shatters his shields and follows up with a lightning strike. Ryo realizes he's in serious danger. Right before the finishing blow lands, he draws the crystal sword and manages to block it. This time, he's actually able to cut through the bird's invisible attacks. When the hawk charges again, he drives the blade straight into its chest. As the hawk falls, Ryo walks over and, weirdly, feels grateful. Even though they only fought twice, that monster pushed him harder than any other opponent and forced him to evolve. He thanks it for making him stronger and lets it die in peace. Right after, a dragon shows up out of nowhere. Ryo figures this is the end, but instead of attacking, the dragon talks to him telepathically. It asks if he's seen a black hawk, and Ryo panics, thinking he might have just killed the dragon's servant. To his surprise, the dragon stays calm and even compliments him for taking it down. The dragon then notices Ryo's weapon and says it's extremely rare, the Fairy King's sword. Stunned, Ryo starts firing off questions, and the dragon introduces itself as Lewin. The two spend the whole day talking, and by evening, Lewin takes off, saying maybe they'll cross paths again someday. A few weeks later, Ryo gets a craving for seafood and heads to the beach. There he finds a shipwreck and a dead man nearby. Then he hears someone groaning and realizes there's a survivor. That's Abel, who remembers a giant octopus attacking the ship during a storm and throwing him into the sea. When Abel fully wakes up, he finds himself inside Ryo's house. He immediately goes looking for the others. But the moment he steps outside, he's completely lost. That's when Ryo appears behind him. Abel is shocked. Despite being a skilled fighter, he never sensed Ryo approaching at all. He's also a little thrown by Ryo's weird outfit, though he politely keeps that comment to himself, for now. After thanking Ryo for saving him, Abel learns everyone else was already dead before Ryo found the wreckage. Abel says that's fine, honestly, since those guys were smugglers anyway. But before he can explain further, hunger hits hard. Ryo calls him inside, and over the meal, Abel starts asking questions. He comments on Ryo's clothes, and Ryo explains he doesn't have spares or materials to make more. Abel first suggests he just buy some, then quickly realizes that might not even be an option. Ryo clarifies that nobody else lives anywhere nearby. Abel asks if he survives by hunting, and Ryo confirms. When Abel points at the knife, Ryo shows off his water magic and explains the magic does most of the heavy lifting. Abel's surprised, saying that as far as he knows, almost half the world can use magic, unlike himself. That throws Ryo off, since he was told only 20% could. Later, Abel asks Ryo to take him back to the coast to check something. Along the way, Abel insists on walking point in case of danger, since he doesn't want to keep being the one who gets rescued. Ryo lets him. When they reach the wreckage, all the bodies are gone. Abel figures the sea, or some nearby monster, must have taken them. He thanks Ryo again, knowing the same thing would have happened to him if he hadn't been saved. Abel still can't find what he was looking for. Now he just wants to reunite with his crew. Problem is, the storm dragged the ship so far south, he has no idea which direction to go. So he gets an idea and asks Ryo to come with him. Says Ryo could help guide him back, and once they reach the city, he'll help Ryo land a real job and a better life. After thinking it over, Ryo agrees and decides to travel with Abel toward civilization. That night, Ryo looks out at the garden he worked so hard to grow and feels a pang of sadness, knowing he's about to leave it all behind. Afterward, he tells Abel he's heading out to say goodbye to someone. Abel's curious but doesn't push. Ryo goes to the lake to find the headless knight and tells it he's leaving the forest for a long time. He thanks it for all the training and then draws his knife, saying he wants one last real fight. The knight draws its blade too, and the two face off. Ryo throws everything he's got at it, but after a long battle, he's completely spent. The knight heads back toward the lake, and Ryo thanks it again. This time, before leaving, the knight turns and raises a magical suit of armor out of the water as a parting gift. Moved by the gesture, Ryo thanks it once more and heads home. The next morning, Ryo and Abel leave the forest. Along the way, a wild boar shows up and Abel asks to handle it. He steps in and kills it instantly with a combat technique. Ryo's impressed, so Abel explains that weapon users have special moves called combat skills. That night, they sleep inside a hollow tree. The next day, they cross a swamp and spot lizardmen. Abel decides to avoid them since they're strong, but Ryo senses they're still being followed. When the monsters close in, Abel gets ready to fight, but Ryo jumps in first and takes down 4 of them instantly with ice spears. Abel's stunned. The mages he knows can only fire off 1 attack at a time. Ryo acts like summoning a bunch at once is the most normal thing in the world. Later, Ryo makes ice cups and fills them with water, and Abel notices his spellcasting sounds different from normal. Rio quickly changes the subject. After that, Abel hands him a coin, and Rio gets excited since it's the first time he's seen money in this world. Abel's shocked at just how isolated Rio's been living. He starts explaining the 3 major nations of the Central Plains, but Rio spends the whole time cracking jokes about the name of the adjunct empire. Shortly after, they enter a field where a nearby rock suddenly moves. Abel slices it in half, while Rio blocks flying rocks with a water shield. They realize they've wandered into a rock golem nest. Abel attacks one, but even after blasting a huge hole through it, the thing regenerates. So Rio handles it his own way, drops a massive block of ice on the golems, and crushes them flat. Abel's floored by how absurdly effective that is. Afterward, they find a special golem with a big magic stone inside, which Abel says is worth a lot. Rio wants the other stones too, but they're buried in ice, and he doesn't have the patience to dig them out. Moving on, they come across a giant beast that looks like a crocodile-hippo hybrid. Abel identifies it as a behemoth, a rare monster so strong that even he's never seen one before. Rio asks if they should hunt it, and Abel shuts that down immediately. Then wyverns show up, and Rio gets excited just watching the fight play out. The wyverns attack with magic, but the behemoth roars and just cancels their spells outright. Rio figures it's some kind of magic negation ability. That night, Abel asks more about that skill, saying he's only heard of traps like that existing in dungeons. Rio perks way up hearing there's a dungeon in the city they're heading to. He's a little annoyed Abel didn't mention that sooner and starts asking what else he's been holding back. Abel checks whether Rio even knows about elves and dwarves, and Rio clearly has no clue. A few days later, they reach the mountains. Rio says there must be human territory on the other side. Abel asks how he knows that, and Rio almost brings up the dragon who taught him so much about the world, but catches himself and gives a vague answer instead. Not long after, they hear something coming from above and brace for the worst. A griffin shows up and the two of them panic. Rio tosses meat into the air fast. Abel copies him and the griffin grabs the food and flies off. Once it's gone, both of them realize they wouldn't have survived an actual fight with that thing. Abel comments, humans haven't seen griffins or behemoths near villages in over a century, probably because the mountains keep them penned in. That reminds Rio of the wyverns from earlier, and he figures their nest must be close by. He's right. They soon find a group of them feeding. Abel says monsters like that usually take around 20 skilled adventurers to handle, but Rio argues they'll probably have to deal with them sooner or later anyway. He asks if Abel can finish one off if it's pinned down, and Abel says yes. Rio then fakes a long chant and summons icicles that pin a wyvern's wings in place, letting Abel finish the job. When 2 more show up, Rio does the same trick again, no chanting this time, which makes Abel suspicious. Still, they take both down, collect the magic stones, and keep moving. After crossing the mountains, they arrive at Green Hills. Abel's shocked they survived the wyverns and still walked away with a huge haul. Rio then asks which country they're about to enter, making it very clear he wants literally anywhere except the so-called adjunct empire because in his opinion, the name is just terrible. Abel finds that reasoning unbelievably weird. Further along, Rio spots a road, and Abel says it should lead to a city. Rio gets excited just thinking about finally sleeping in a real bed, while Abel hypes up the local food. By nightfall, they arrive and eat at an inn. Over dinner, Abel suggests Rio join the Adventurers Guild. He explains that a guild card works as ID, helps with city entry fees, and lets you sell magic stones and monster parts for good money. Rio starts ribbing Abel, bringing up the silver coin he'd already spent on him. Abel ignores it and keeps explaining. Then Rio's food arrives, and he goes completely still. It's curry and rice. He can't believe a dish like this exists in this world. The first bite hits him with pure nostalgia. Tastes like home. He finishes the plate instantly and orders another. The next day, Rio can't stop talking about the curry. He jokes that Abel's clearly been sitting on valuable information and demands the rest of the truth. Abel gets defensive, but all Rio really wants to know is where the dessert shops are. Abel dodges the question, claims he's not into sweets, and makes such an awkward exit that it only makes Rio more suspicious. Shortly after, they arrive in Lawn, a city surrounded by endless wheat fields. At the gate, a guard named Nimmer recognizes Abel and is floored since Abel had been missing for months. Abel explains he only made it back thanks to Rio. Nimmer thanks Rio warmly for saving his friend. Once inside, Abel takes Rio straight to the Adventurers Guild. He explains that beginners usually start at F rank, but a recommendation from someone B rank or higher can bump them straight to D rank. Since Abel qualifies, Rio gets to skip the bottom tier entirely. At the guild, Abel's return causes a huge commotion. Everyone thrilled to see him alive. While he gets pulled into a meeting, Rio steps out for some air. Outside, he bumps into an elf. Rio gets distracted by how gorgeous she is. While she's more focused on his outfit, she recognizes his coat as something tied to the Fairy King and casually mentions he must be pretty favored to have gotten that. Rio has no idea what she means. And before he can ask more, she says she's busy and walks off. Later, Abel brings him back inside and introduces him as the guy who saved his life. Rio gets buried in praise. Then Abel asks the receptionist to register him as a D-rank adventurer. She's surprised and says she still needs proof, so Abel asks her to call the guildmaster. When Hugh, the guildmaster, hears Abel's back, he rushes over. Abel explains everything and shows off the wyvern magic stones they collected. Hugh's jaw drops, especially after hearing they crossed the Cursed Mountains, a place almost nobody walks out of alive. That alone is enough to convince him, and he approves Rio's rank on the spot. Right after, Abel's team shows up in tears, having thought he was dead. Hugh lets them reunite and takes Rio to finish registering. He explains that Abel's team, the Crimson Sword, is one of the guild's best. Rio just wants to know if he actually deserves the rank, and Hugh says yes. If Abel couldn't have pulled all that off alone, then Rio clearly proved his worth. In the office, a receptionist named Nina handles the paperwork. She mentions new adventurers can stay at the guild lodging for 300 days and brings up a beginner dungeon course. Rio signs up immediately. Then she has him place his hand on a crystal device, which logs his info and creates his guild card. And just like that, Rio's officially in the guild. Afterward, Abel takes him around the city and offers to buy him clothes and a staff as a thank you. Rio takes the clothes but says a staff would be useless since he can cast magic without one, and he fights close range with a blade. Either way, Abel's even more shocked when Rio reveals that little knife he carries is actually his sword. Still, what Rio really wants is information, not gear. That's when he stumbles onto something strange. This world runs on the exact same time system and even the same metric measurements as Earth. Hours, days, months, all identical. That makes Rio think someone from Earth must have ended up here a long time ago and influenced how this world works. Later, Abel takes him to a big inn where guild members throw a party to celebrate Abel's safe return. The night gets so wild that Nina has to rescue Rio the next morning and haul him back to his room. At the guild lodging, Rio meets two roommates already living there, Mills and Ito. Soon after, Nina brings in another new recruit named Eamon, and the four of them quickly click. A few days later, Rio and Eamon finish basic dungeon training and are told they'll enter the first floor that afternoon. Eamon's visibly nervous, but Rio tells him not to waste energy freaking out before he's even there. In the dungeon, the instructor explains the city was built around it and that monster surges happen occasionally, though not right now. The first floor is considered safe, so students can explore near the entrance. Rio and Eamon stick together, and soon, Rio senses something approaching. A giant soldier ant shows up, and Rio instantly recognizes it from the monster guide. He pins it down with icicles and tells Eamon exactly where to strike. Eamon lands the finishing blow and gets his first kill, which has him absolutely thrilled. Rio grabs the ant's magic stone as a souvenir. That night, their roommates are impressed by the story. Even though Eamon gives most of the credit to Rio, he says he wants to go back the next day, but feels nervous going alone, so Rio agrees to tag along. He's curious too, since the first floor should have been empty, yet they still ran into a monster. Eto adds that soldier ants have been showing up more and more on the upper floors lately, which has everyone wondering why. Abel suddenly shows up and explains that soldier ants can dig upward, which probably solves the mystery. The others are starstruck, getting to see a famous adventurer up close, but Rio just chats with him casually like always. Abel jokes that the guys should be looking after Rio, since he doesn't have much sense. Niels, all fired up, tells Abel he's his idol and asks for a handshake. Abel agrees and reminds him that staying alive matters more than glory. Later, Abel's team shows up and drags him off for skipping his guild report. One of the girls keeps staring at Rio with obvious curiosity, while another apologizes for the mess before pulling the group away. After they leave, Niels and Ito stay hyped, but Rio genuinely doesn't get what the big deal is. The next day, Rio and Eamon head back to the dungeon and face a pack of monster dogs. Rio pins them down with ice while Eamon takes them out. Afterward, Rio mentions Amon's swordsmanship reminds him of Abel's. Amon explains he trained under an old swordsman named Kira, who learned at a major school in the capital. Rio figures Abel probably comes from the same background. He says Amon's style is solid and safe but burns too much energy, so he needs to work on his stamina. Pure encouragement. Rio mentions that even Abel trains every morning, proof that talent alone is never enough. Amon gets super motivated hearing that. The next day, Rio visits the library and heads straight for the alchemy section. The sheer number of books completely overwhelms him. He steps out for some air to clear his head. That's exactly when a total solar eclipse suddenly darkens the city. A second later, he notices something's wrong. Everyone around him has vanished. He senses danger immediately and blocks a fire attack coming from behind with an ice wall. When he turns around, he sees a female demon walking toward him. Rio knows instantly she's the strongest enemy he's ever faced. Running seems impossible in this strange space. So he braces to fight. He raises layered ice barriers to hold back her flames, but she switches to wind magic, which cuts straight through his defense without mercy. His armor saves him, and when she notices the Fairy King's cloak, she realizes he's no ordinary human. She closes in with a sword, and Rio responds with his own ice blade. He stays on the defensive as she overwhelms him with speed, but compared to the headless knight who trained him, her attacks are still manageable. Rio counters with a storm of icicles, but she dodges them easily. As the fight drags on, he notices she's propelling herself with wind. When she charges for the finishing blow, he blocks it clean enough to surprise her. That's when she demands to know who he is and how he got the Fairy King's gear. She goes all in after that, and Rio shifts tactics, mixing icicles with high-pressure water jets. He finally manages to wound her, only to notice her injuries heal almost instantly. That split second of distraction is enough for her to slam him into a building. Right as she's about to finish him off, boiling droplets start falling from the sky. One splashes her and burns badly, forcing her to hide inside a stone sphere while the scalding rain keeps falling. When it stops, she bursts back out with even more firepower and marches toward him again. But by then, the eclipse is ending and sunlight starts destroying her sword. Realizing the fight can't continue, she retreats. Instead of leaving quietly, she introduces herself as Leonor and asks his name. Rio tells her, making it very clear he wants nothing to do with the demon. Leonor's surprised he even knows about demons at all. She admits she probably should have killed him already, then tells him to survive until they meet again because next time she plans to finish the job properly. The eclipse ends, the city goes back to normal, and every trace of the battle vanishes like nothing ever happened. Shaken and exhausted, Rio decides to buy some books and rest. He stops by the bank to cash out the money from the wyvern stones he sold, then heads back to his room, only to find his friends aren't there. Rio's leaving the dorm when he catches Niels, Ito, and Amon cornered by a group of rough adventurers. The troublemakers are led by a guy named Dan, who mocks them for complaining after already getting beat up. According to him, a monster in a dungeon wouldn't show any mercy either. Before he can keep talking, two of his goons suddenly pass out. Rio had already moved. He tells Dan the lesson sounds great and maybe he should try following it himself. Dan charges in swinging, but Rio slips past him and rams the hilt of his own weapon into Dan's stomach hard enough to fold him over. With that done, Rio checks on his friends and tells them their stamina is pathetic. If losers on that level can catch them off guard. Still, he says the first move is treating the wounds, not acting tough. They all head to the bathhouse, where a priest treats the wound Rio took earlier. The others are surprised he even got hurt at all, but he stays quiet about who caused it. Not long after, the three boys start entering the dungeon on their own. Without Rio, Amon and Niels take point while Ito stays back for support and healing. On one run, they notice something's off. Goblins, including archers, are showing up way closer to the surface than they should be. Amon wants to keep pushing for more loot, but Niels shuts that down immediately, reminding him that greed is how people die. They decide to pull out while they still can. That choice saves them because deeper in, another adventurer team gets wiped out by something far stronger. Meanwhile, Rio keeps replaying the fight with Leonor in his head. He feels good about his spell speed, but not about his own movement. She was just too fast. Since he can't borrow wind magic, he starts inventing his own method. The idea is using water pressure to propel himself forward. He tests it standing on ice and firing jets behind him. The result is not impressive. He does move, just not enough to satisfy him. Later, he heads back to the library to dig deeper into alchemy and anything related to demons. At the same time, Lynn is there too, looking for any proof of a spell powerful enough to create a giant ice wall and crush rock golems. She finds nothing, which makes her suspect Rio isn't telling the full truth. While searching, she crosses paths with Sarah. They exchange a few words and go their separate ways. Back at the guild, Mills and the others report what they found down there. Nina immediately realizes the info is serious and rushes it to Hugh. He takes it seriously right away. Goblins climbing that high in the dungeon isn't normal, and to him, it looks like the start of something much bigger. He immediately calls in every B-rank team or higher. That leaves only 2 teams in the city, Crimson Sword and White Brigade. Abel's already irritated before the meeting even starts, mainly because he hates dealing with Phelps. Once both teams arrive, Hugh lays out the situation, saying there could be another large-scale dungeon surge coming. Their mission is to confirm what's happening. If things have already gotten worse, they're to return immediately so the city can seal off the area and call in the knights. Both teams accept. The next morning, Rio plans to visit the Northern Library. His roommates mention D-rank adventurers can get in, though the truly restricted books are for higher ranks only. That only makes him more interested. When he arrives, he likes the place instantly. Still, he avoids asking directly about demons, since that would look suspicious. Then he spots Sarah again and completely loses focus. Around the same time, Hugh and the 2 elite teams arrive at the dungeon entrance. Right before the door opens, Abel senses danger and asks Lynn to scan what's inside with magic. She does, and instantly detects a massive cluster of monsters piled up behind the gate, confirming everything. The dungeon surge has already started. Hugh orders a retreat and sends out urgent messages. The city reacts fast. The dungeon gets sealed, and adventurers get called to the defensive wall around it. Niels and the others quickly realize their discovery was only the beginning. Meanwhile, back at the library, Rio finally talks to Sarah. She asks what he's looking for. He almost says demons, catches himself in time, and instead claims he wants to study alchemy for golem making. Sarah likes the idea and offers to guide him to the right books. While helping him, she mentions she runs a B-rank team solo and that most elves avoid humans, though she doesn't really fit that mold herself. Then the real battle kicks off. The dungeon gate gives way and a flood of goblins pours out. Adventurers and knights fire off magic and arrows from the top of the wall, trying to contain the swarm before it spreads. Hugh realizes immediately this attack is worse than the last major surge. In the middle of combat, Niels brings fresh arrows to Abel, along with Hugh's message that Crimson Sword will need to handle the enemy leader once the smaller monsters are thinned out. When the battlefield finally starts clearing, Abel and Phelps climb down from the wall with their teams and push toward the dungeon entrance. A goblin general shows up first, then another, then a third. Abel immediately understands that means there's still a goblin king down there. He quickly splits up targets, taking one general for himself and assigning the others. Mid-fight, he notices the king stepping forward and yells for everyone to get down. A devastating wind attack tears through the area the next instant and wipes out all the generals at once. Now the Goblin King stands alone, and it's clear only Abel and Phelps have any shot at facing him head-on. Even together, the two of them struggle to land real damage. Abel then uses a sword technique to dodge the king's strike and land a direct hit, but it's still not enough. At the perfect moment, Lynn sends her magic through the opening he created and finishes the monster off. The defenders finally relax, thinking the worst is over. When Rio gets back to the guild later, the place is buzzing with noise and chaos. Michael, meanwhile, is literally buried alive in paperwork. He now has to report the incident, sort out payments, arrange repairs, evaluate everyone involved, contact higher authorities, and deal with the fallout of shutting down the dungeon. Rio's roommates fill him in on what happened, hyping up Abel's performance. They also bring up Lynn's finishing spell and the technique Abel used to dodge ranged attacks. When Abel himself shows up, he gives the technique a name, Perfect Shadow. Rio ends up more impressed by the name than by anything else about it. Soon after, Lynn and Rihya show up too. Lynn wastes no time asking Rio point blank if he can really create an ice structure on that scale. Rio answers so casually it sounds ridiculous, saying he can make something like a 40-meter cube. That only confuses her more. She asks if it's a custom spell. Rio doesn't even know the term. When she explains that normal magic relies on recited formulas, he basically says he treats that as an optional decoration. That answer completely short-circuits her brain. Before she can dig further, Rio bails on the conversation to go eat. Shortly after, work starts drying up because the dungeon's closed. The job board's nearly empty, and Rio's roommates get frustrated since there's barely any way to make money. Rio says he's not even after hunting jobs anyway. He needs magic copper ore for alchemy experiments. The others are shocked because that material is expensive, but Rio has plenty of cash to cover it. Then, out of nowhere, he offers a deal. If they head to an abandoned mine and collect the ore for him, he'll pay well just for taking the job, plus a bonus for every piece they bring back. The only rule is everyone comes back alive. That's more than enough to convince them. After they leave, Rio heads back up, but hears a commotion outside. Looking down, he sees some knights trying to forcibly drag off a woman while another adventurer steps in to stop them. The argument escalates until one of the knights goes for his sword, only to lose his balance instantly and faceplant. He tries to get up and it happens again. Then Phelps shows up and shuts the whole thing down. The knights try to act tough with him until he reveals exactly who he is. The moment they realize whose family he's from, they back off fast. Once the woman's safe and the other adventurer walks off with her, Phelps looks up toward Rio and greets him. For a second, Rio worries he somehow noticed the trick that made that knight slip. But Phelps is just referring to the stories Abel's been telling about Rio's magic. Their conversation doesn't last long before Phelps's secretary shows up and drags him off. Rio realizes the two of them are dangerous in a very different way from regular adventurers. That night, Rio's eating alone when Abel joins him. After some back and forth, Abel admits he needs help with something and drags him into the entertainment district. There, he explains that a friend from the Night Watch asked for help rounding up some officers who ditched duty to party. While searching, Rio spots a suspicious group of masked figures and points them out. Abel says strangers pass through the city all the time, but Rio points out the dungeon's closed right now, so that excuse doesn't fly. The masked group notices them too and tries to lure them away. Rio and Abel follow on purpose. The trap springs and Rio instantly flattens the attackers with dense blocks of ice. Afterward, Abel searches them and finds an alchemy-related item that catches Rio's attention. He also discovers the group belongs to another country and has its own adventurer ranks. Abel ties them up and prepares to hand them over. At the same time, the runaway knights from earlier decide they want revenge on Phelps. They never get close to acting on it. Before they can do anything, Phelps's secretary takes them down with poison needles, then burns them so completely, nothing's left. A day after the dungeon disaster, officials from the capital arrive to investigate. The moment they show up, problems start. Their leader, Arthur, acts like Lon should bow completely to his every demand. He expects the city to feed and house his entire team, even with supplies already stretched thin. On top of that, he wants to reopen the dungeon immediately for research. Hugh pushes back hard, saying, reopening it this soon is asking for disaster. Arthur throws around his authority from the new Ministry of Dungeons, and the argument drags on until the older mage traveling with his group steps in to calm things down. He resolves the supply issue for now, then backs Hugh on one point. If reopening the dungeon hurts the city or its people, the ministry takes responsibility. Arthur hates that condition, but Hugh won't budge without it, so he's forced to accept. The old mage then says they'll need strong adventurers to escort the expedition. Meanwhile, Rio heads to the inn where Abel's team is staying, hoping for better food than what's served at the dorm. Right before he goes in, a girl comes running out, begging him to take her to the guild because she has urgent news for Abel. Rio's hungry, but he helps anyway. The letter she's carrying is from Abel's old instructor in the capital, asking him to escort the research team going into the dungeon. Abel's not into the idea at all. He remembers a powerful team that once went into a dungeon too soon after a surge and was never seen again. Rio says that already sounds like reason enough to say no. The girl then introduces herself as Natalie, a rookie mage from a family known for water magic. Lynn starts grilling her about unusual ice spells, but Natalie's got no answers. Still too much of a beginner. When she hears Rio supposedly can create absurdly huge ice structures, she's floored. Abel, of course, only makes it worse, praising Rio like a maniac and even warning his own teammates never to pick a fight with him. He tells Natalie that if she can't reach anyone in an emergency, she should run straight to Rio. Despite his concerns, Abel ends up taking the job. The next day, he joins the research expedition as an escort. The old mage greets him like an old acquaintance, and they chat about a mana reading device that sends info from inside the dungeon up to a waiting team above. Over the first 3 days, the group keeps descending and reaches the 7th floor without hitting anything strange. Arthur's team clearly wants to rush through, but Abel ignores their attitude. Back in the city, Rio's stuck outside like the rest of the lower-rank adventurers. Still, something keeps nagging at him. He asks Hugh what color the monster stones from the surge were. Hugh instantly realizes the question matters because those goblins left behind pale yellow stones instead of the green ones they should have had. Then everything falls apart. As they explore deeper, the research team finds a strange gate radiating unknown energy. They figure it might connect somewhere far away and start setting up equipment around it. The instant they try to interact with the gate, the entire group vanishes. Outside, Natalie watches the readings die instantly. A moment later, the signal flickers back for just 1 second, showing the group on the 40th floor, then cuts out again. The truth is even worse. They didn't just go deeper, they got moved somewhere else entirely. The moment the group regains their footing, Abel checks on his people first. Everyone on his side is alive. Arthur, meanwhile, is less scared than thrilled. He realizes his old theory was wrong. The surge monsters didn't come from deeper in the dungeon, they came through this place, from the other side of the gate. To him, this discovery could make his entire career. While he's dreaming about promotions, shapes start appearing in the distance. Back on the surface, the support team is already panicking over the lost signal when another man arrives. Christopher, representing the Magic College, which normally rivals Arthur's academy. Rivalry doesn't matter right now. He reveals his own team also entered the dungeon and vanished the exact same way. When he hears the lost group briefly appeared on the 40th floor, he's stunned. Nobody's ever gotten past the 38th floor before. Natalie realizes this is way beyond anyone here. Then she remembers what Abel told her. Without wasting another second, she runs to find Rio. At the same time, Hugh hears the escort team might be missing and rushes straight to the dungeon. He orders the guild team to stand by but doesn't say anything publicly yet. He wants proof before triggering full-blown panic. Meanwhile, Rio's at the library, getting nowhere with his research. Heading up the stairs, he catches himself hoping to run into Sarah again. This time, he actually does. She's organizing books, and he walks straight over to talk to her. He says he's been digging through old records of eclipses and past surges, trying to find a pattern. Sarah says she knows exactly where that material is and takes him there. As they walk, Rio shares his suspicion that eclipses and surges might be connected. Sarah says that idea isn't crazy at all. She's lived long enough to notice eclipses tend to happen before surges, though never one this extreme. She asks what made him think of the connection. Rio almost says too much and catches himself. To dodge the question, he brings up the colors of the magic stones instead. Sarah lets it slide and explains that a stone's color usually reflects the monster's age. Pale stones are tied to newborn monsters. That makes the surge stones even weirder. Rio says weak goblins being pale is one thing, but stronger creatures like goblin generals and the Goblin King shouldn't have shown up that fast if they'd just been born. Sarah agrees. Something about this doesn't add up. Artificially creating that many monsters would take an absurd amount of mana. Then Sarah remembers that older records from a previous surge mention equally pale stones, and offers to show Rio those damaged archives. He follows her deeper into a forgotten section of the library. Down below, far from there, the missing team is still trying to figure out where they are. The old mage confirms their instruments still work, meaning the surface probably knows they're alive, at least in theory. Still, he doubts help can actually reach them. He asks Rihia if the place feels familiar. After thinking it over, she compares it to being inside a massive sacred barrier, like sanctuary magic on a huge scale. If that's true, it means nobody can leave, and nobody can get in either. Abel immediately understands how bad that is. Lynn uses wind magic to scan the area and detects around 1,000 humans nearby, along with dozens of creatures she can't identify. Abel assumes the humans must be Arthur's people and heads toward them with the others. At the dungeon entrance, Hugh finds Christopher and the remaining researchers. The moment he hears the missing team surfaced on the 40th floor, he loses whatever hope he had left. Sending more adventurers down there would just get them killed too. Christopher agrees. Right now, there's no rescue plan, just waiting. Inside the sealed zone, Arthur's people are already getting slaughtered. Strange enemies hit them with violet fire, forcing some researchers to hide behind barriers while the rest die almost instantly. When the attackers finally come into view, Arthur recognizes them from old texts. They're devils, not regular demons, and that distinction doesn't make anyone feel better. By the time Abel's team arrives, only Arthur and a handful of others are still alive. Rihia and the old mage recognize the creatures too. Old legends describe devils as stronger than humans and supposedly resistant to magic. The old mage doesn't care about rumors and orders an all-out magic assault. To everyone's shock, it works. The devils bleed. Rihia's stunned, but the mage explains magic immunity was never a proven fact, just old speculation. Still, they've got another problem. Their casters are burning through mana way too fast. Abel notices one enemy clearly standing out from the rest and realizes that one's the key. If they can take it down, they might survive. Once the mages start running dry, Abel's team pushes into melee. Warren shields the others while the group cuts devils down one by one. They're making progress, but the pressure keeps climbing. Lynn burns through all her mana. Rihia and Warren have to cover for her. Then Rihia notices something horrifying about the leader: mismatched eyes. She warns Abel this isn't just another devil, it's a demon prince. The kind of being that can eventually grow into a demon lord. That's basically the worst thing he could have heard. Abel decides there's no more room to retreat. Even if he can't kill it, he can at least try to thin out the enemy numbers. With whatever time's left, he throws himself into the fight, cutting down the weaker devils. But the prince sweeps his teammates clean off the battlefield and turns all its attention on him. The creature's speed is overwhelming. Arthur's group tries to help with magic, but the prince just ignores it and the remaining devils force them back. Abel goes all in with one of his high-speed sword techniques and manages to dodge one attack, but his counter isn't enough to finish it. The prince answers with a brutal strike to his shoulder and drops him. Abel can't even stand. The demon prince raises its weapon to finish him off. Then the ceiling explodes. Rio drops in. For a second, nobody says anything because nobody can believe what they're seeing. Rio looks at Abel and asks, completely calm, if he's still alive, like he'd just shown up late to dinner. Abel tries to explain they can't leave while that monster's still standing. Rio just says he'll handle it. When Abel, panicking, warns him it's a demon prince, Rio treats the news like a minor inconvenience at best. A little earlier, Natalie had found him and begged for help after learning Abel's team had vanished. Rio listened while already moving. He conjured an ice carriage for her, drove straight to the dungeon, ignored the guards who tried to stop him, froze them in place, and forced his way inside. Then, deciding the stairs would waste too much time, he used his water magic to cut a straight path down. Now face to face with the demon prince, the lesser devils attack first. Rio wipes out their projectiles with ice and kills them almost instantly with water slashes. Then he turns to the prince and tells it to hurry up. The prince charges. Rio steps aside and slices its head clean off in one swing. For a second, he thinks that's it, but the creature grabs its own head and reattaches it. So Rio stops playing around. He unleashes a wave of cutting water jets, shreds the prince completely, and destroys its core in the process. The body turns to dust. Just like that, no ceremony at all. The fight's over. Abel just stares. The enemy that nearly wiped them all out is gone in a matter of seconds. When Abel thanks him for saving everyone, Rio says he can pay him back in food. Abel says one dinner isn't nearly enough, and promises to cover him for an entire week. Rihia rushes to Abel's side. Warren carries the unconscious Lynn, and the old mage thanks Rio too. Rio brushes it off, saying he just got there in time. Then he registers how many people didn't survive long enough for any of this to matter. Abel suggests collecting the devil stones and using the money to help the families of the dead. Rio agrees, but his attention's already drifting toward the bigger mystery. Everyone there admits they've never seen a devil before. Rio wants to ask more about how devils differ from demons, but saves it for later. What matters right now is the strange field, like a barrier, that he felt around the area. It vanished the moment the prince died. The old mage figures that's what was trapping them there. Rio brings up something else. While moving through the 39th floor, he sensed an unusual presence near the stairs. He suggests they check it before leaving, since it might be connected to everything that happened. Before moving on, they collect the devil stones. The stones are dark, unlike anything anyone there has ever seen. Not even the old mage recognizes them. Rihia says there's no record of stones like this in the church archives or any museum collection. The mage adds that devils have always been linked to space-time phenomena since they seem to appear out of nowhere. Rio takes all of this in and realizes one thing: they still don't have the full picture. In another dungeon far from Lawn, Roman's team reaches a grim ritual site and attempts to summon the Demon King. Leonore answers instead. She immediately realizes these humans have no clue who they just summoned. When Roman, full of pride, declares himself the destined hero meant to defeat the Demon King, she's mildly interested for half a second and decides to test him herself. The result is pathetic. He's knocked out almost instantly. Since the fight isn't even remotely entertaining, Leonore loses interest and grabs the black crystal resting on the altar like she's picking up a travel souvenir. The rest of Roman's team is too terrified to move. She tells them to stop staring and go tend to their leader before he dies. Even while being treated, Roman keeps calling her the Demon King. She corrects him, saying he's aiming way below her level entirely. According to her, he might someday be able to challenge the actual Demon King, but he's nowhere close to someone like her. Then she brings up Rio, saying she's finally found a human worth noting. Before stepping through a portal, she warns Roman that if he ever wants to reach that level, he's going to need to get absurdly stronger. Meanwhile, back at the other dungeon, Abel's group finds a damaged black orb, looking a lot like the one Leonore took. Nobody can identify it, so the old mage decides to bring it back for study. The moment they climb out, Hugh's relieved to see Abel and the group alive, but immediately turns on Rio and asks what on earth possessed him to freeze the guards and storm the dungeon solo. Rio starts apologizing, but the old mage cuts in right away and says none of them would still be standing if Rio hadn't done exactly that. That shuts the lecture down instantly. When Hugh hears the full story, he's shaken. The old mage explains the 40th floor had dozens of devils and even a demon prince. Hugh first assumes Abel's team somehow held the line, but the mage says flatly they never would have survived the prince. It was Rio who turned that entire disaster around. That creates a new problem. The old mage says Rio's name needs to stay out of official records, because the moment nobles hear about someone like him, they'll start getting involved. Hugh agrees that keeping him away from politics is the safer call. The next morning, Rio drags his roommates back to training and leaves them behind almost immediately. On the way back, the smell of curry pulls him into a restaurant where he unexpectedly runs into Sarah. They end up sharing a meal, and she asks the same questions she always does about his rank and background. After eating, Rio asks why she almost never shows up at the guild, despite being an adventurer. She explains she works as a swordsmanship instructor for the local knights, so she doesn't have much reason to hang around there. Then she invites him to train later. Rio agrees right away, partly because his last big fight still has him on edge. On the training field, Sarah comes at him fast. He manages to defend well enough to impress her, which already puts him above most of the knights she trains. Then she stops holding back. The next exchange is completely one-sided. Rio gets overwhelmed, loses control of the pace, and has his sword broken. He admits defeat, but instead of backing off, Sarah hugs him, genuinely thrilled to have found someone capable of pushing her that hard. When she asks where he learned to fight, Rio says the Fairy King taught him. That answer catches her completely off guard. Their conversation gets cut short when her maid arrives to remind her of a lesson she has to give the feudal lord's grandson. Before leaving, Sarah tells the maid to take good care of Rio because he matters to her, which the maid immediately misreads. Shortly after, Hugh shows up in a carriage and tells Rio to get in. Rio braces for a delayed lecture, but Hugh says the old mage already explained everything. So instead of real punishment, he hands Rio a mandatory guild assignment: escort a merchant caravan. A little later, Niels comes to Rio with a serious request. His hometown needs help with a monster problem, but the job can only be accepted by a D-rank adventurer or a team linked to one. Since Rio's the only one in the group who qualifies, Niels asks him to join temporarily. Eamon says the enemies are just goblins and skeletons, though Ito points out those two usually don't show up together. Rio barely registers how strange that is. The second he hears skeletons, he's already interested. Since he hasn't fought any yet, that alone is enough to get him on board. When they bring the job to Hugh, he warns them it's not as simple as it sounds. 2 groups have already failed there, including a D-rank team. The boys are shocked. Hugh explains the monsters weren't the only issue. The villagers themselves refuse to cooperate. Mills can't even picture his people acting like that, but Hugh lets them take the job anyway, warning them not to underestimate it. He also points out that Ito's healing will make a big difference if things go wrong. They reach Kiati quickly, thanks to the pace Rio forces on everyone. The villagers welcome Niels back warmly, which surprises Rio, since he kind of expected Niels had been kicked out for being a pain. Niels gets annoyed, but not enough to deny it. They meet the village chief, Bulin, who explains why the earlier adventurers failed. The first group went too deep into the eastern forest, an area the village treats as off-limits. After that, trust broke down, so the next group couldn't get anything out of the villagers and left empty-handed. Niels says there's more to the story, but it involves village secrets, so he needs permission before explaining. That night, the group stays at his family's house. His younger siblings greet everyone, and the conversation drifts to how Niels wanted to become an adventurer a long time ago, but had to stay because their parents died and the family needed him. Later, after meeting with the village council, Niels comes back and says he has permission to tell the truth. The village guards 2 unusual things. One is a guardian beast living in the eastern forest. Rio immediately starts imagining some cursed, legendary monster turned villain just so he can fight it, and Niels shuts that fantasy down before it gets out of hand. The second is a shrine tied to the village's past. The next day, Bulin takes them to where the goblins have been showing up. Amon and Ito spot tracks, and Rio senses a group moving nearby. Niels suggests leaving one alive so it can lead them to the nest. The plan works perfectly. Rio pins the goblins down, the others finish them off, and the lone survivor bolts straight for a cave. More goblins are waiting outside, so Rio locks them down too, and the group clears the area. Then the real target shows up, a goblin general. The others tense up instantly, but Rio handles it so fast it barely counts as a real fight. He traps it in ice and lets Niels land the finishing blow. After collecting the stone, they head back to the village. The elder is thrilled to hear the goblins are gone and takes them to the shrine. Along the way, Edo notices the symbol hanging on her staff and recognizes it as a mark of the Earth Mother Goddess. That opens up an older story. Long ago, several gods were worshipped in the region, but today almost everyone follows only the Goddess of Light. Their village kept the old faith. The elder also explains her healing magic doesn't work like church magic. It doesn't rely on the same chant-based system. They soon reach the guardian beast's cave. Rio's fully expecting some dramatic monster reveal, but what comes out is a giant talking wolf named Kusen. He's oddly disappointed it's not some corrupted enemy. Kusen shocks everyone by directly asking Rio's name. Normally, he doesn't even bother giving humans his own name. This time's different. He says Rio carries a presence similar to the Fae, which gives him an odd sense of familiarity. That only feeds Rio's growing suspicion that his connection to the Fairy King means more than he thought. Kusen then explains the real problem. About 30 skeletons and a stronger undead leader are trapped near the shrine, and he's been holding them back. The plan is to clear out the weaker skeletons first, then deal with the boss. As soon as they start, Ito's light magic tears through the regular undead with ease. After that, Eamon and Niels break open the sealed gate and expose the giant skeleton leader. Rio turns their weapons into ice hammers and takes control of the fight while they handle the damage. He shoots an ice signal into the sky so Kusen knows he can release the seal. The massive skeleton charges, only to instantly lose its footing as Rio freezes the ground. Every time it tries to get up, it slips again, and Amon and Niels keep smashing it until it finally goes down for good. With the fight over, they head into the shrine itself and find a statue of the Earth Mother holding a broken orb. The elder recalls being told the statue once held a glowing stone that later darkened and shattered. Putting that together with Kusen's earlier comments about strange mana reaching the shrine from outside, she concludes some outside force caused the monsters to appear. To stop it from happening again, she seals the shrine completely. On the way back to Lon, the group talks about another problem. Their time at the guild lodging is almost up. Mills and Ito have already started talking about renting a place together and invite Amon and Rio to join. Eamon agrees on the spot. Rio doesn't say no, but doesn't say yes either. Right after they get back, Rio's forced escort mission kicks off. By coincidence, his roommates are on the same caravan job, escorting a merchant to Whitnash. Nils proudly announces their team now has a name, Room Number 10. The others have already given up arguing about it, and Rio doesn't even bother reacting. During the trip, he learns the merchant's heading there for the Open Port Festival, which only happens once every 5 years. That grabs his attention immediately. When they arrive, the merchant tells the guards they're free to enjoy the city for the next 10 days before the trip back. The second he finishes talking, Rio and Niels bolt straight for the food stalls, with Ito and Eamon right behind. Before long, they're tearing through the festival food stall by stall, and Rio notices a lot of it tastes weirdly familiar, almost like it came straight from Earth. The next day, the place is packed, but the entrance line is crawling because some high-status visitor has a paperwork issue, and the guards are making everyone wait. Oscar, the Empire's strongest mage, is stuck in that same mess. While waiting, his assistant asks why the Emperor sent both him and Princess Fiona. Oscar says he can't prove anything, but suspects the Emperor's expecting some ugly political cleanup and wants it handled without Fiona seeing that side of him, since she's his talented youngest daughter and already leads the royal mages. That's reasonable enough. Oscar decides the reason doesn't matter much in the end. His job is keeping her alive. That night, the visiting nobles attend a formal event. Fiona shows up with her older brother Conrad, who handles the social side while she quietly suffers through it. Once he notices she's worn out, he sends her off early. Thrilled, she heads back to her room, flops onto the bed, and wishes she were training with soldiers instead of smiling at aristocrats. The festival kicks off the next day with a big parade. Rio spots Abel sitting with the VIPs, looking deeply uncomfortable. Niels, meanwhile, spots Fiona and starts staring. Ito tells him to stop dreaming and aim lower. Then Lynn, Rihia, and the rest of Abel's team show up. Ryo asks why Abel's sitting with the elite, and Rihia explains he's filling in for Hugh until the guild master arrives. Lin then notices a strong wind barrier around the VIP area. Ito assumed it was just standard security, but Lin says the ruling family of Whitnash is said to own a relic that can create a wind shield. That's probably what it is. Rio gets excited at the idea of a legendary item that casts magic on its own. Lin says it burns too much power for everyday use, but makes sense for a gathering full of nobles and royalty. Then she brings up Fiona's right hand, a feared fire mage known as the Inferno Mage. The stories about him are ridiculous, from wiping out entire squads of soldiers to killing a wyvern in one hit. Rihia says maybe not all of it's true, but she still wants nothing to do with him. After that, Abel's team leaves. Rio turns to head out with his friends and nearly bumps into Oscar. Both dodge the collision at the last second, trade quick apologies, and move on. Rio forgets about it instantly. Oscar doesn't. Later, Oscar's stuck buying festival snacks for Fiona and looks thoroughly miserable, hauling everything through the crowd while his assistant keeps checking the list. Around the same time, Abel crosses paths with Conrad. Conrad says Abel reminds him of someone, but Abel brushes it off. He admits sitting near Fiona earlier felt awkward, though the person he found more interesting was actually Oscar. Conrad suddenly makes up an excuse and leaves. Back in the room, Fiona's resting when Oscar returns with the food. The assistant brings up the boy Oscar almost bumped into, and Oscar says the kid moved way too sharp to be anyone ordinary. Fiona asks who they're talking about, and Oscar describes Rio as someone dressed like a mage, but moving like a swordsman. He then uses fire magic to warm up her snacks. Fiona's delighted and thanks him, calling him teacher, which just embarrasses him. The next day, Rio and the others watch an archery contest over the water. Eamon and Ito both compete and miss badly. Rio asks Niels if he wants to try, and Niels proudly admits he's never even held a bow in his life. Abel happens to overhear and laughs, since he used to be exactly the same way. Rio immediately uses that to push him into the competition. Abel's not interested at all, but fires off an arrow anyway and nails the hardest target dead center. The crowd goes wild. His victory lasts about a second because Rihia shows up and coldly asks why he didn't come find her the moment he was free. Lin quietly explains Abel had promised to spend the day with Rihia and is now paying for blowing it off. Rihia drags him away while Niels keeps idolizing him from a distance. Back in Lon, Sarah spends the whole day looking for Rio. When she can't find him, she asks Nina at the guild and learns he's out of town for about 2 weeks. She's frustrated because she found something she wanted to tell him and now has to wait. Back at the festival, another event kicks off, a boat race. Niels and Eamon compete while Rio and Ito watch from the shore. Then Dan shows up and Niels immediately clashes with him. Since competitors are allowed to attack each other in the second half of the race, the two idiots go all in. They start whacking each other with their own oars instead of focusing on the race. Before long, they break their oars, steal their partners, stall out right before the finish line, and let every other boat pass them. Then they capsize and keep fighting in the water too. The crowd finds it hilarious and even hands out a reward just for the entertainment value. Naturally, the two of them argue about that too. The next day, the group checks out a strange ship that moves without sails or oars. They're told it runs on a mix of alchemy, magic stones, and water wind systems. Afterward, they stop at a weapon shop. Ito wants something that lets her support the team from mid-range, and the owner recommends a repeating crossbow. It fits exactly what she wants, so she buys it on the spot. That night, Abel attends yet another formal gathering at the mansion now that Hugh's already headed home. After briefly talking with Conrad and Fiona, he realizes he feels off without his sword. He tells himself it doesn't matter, since the wind barrier is active. Terrible timing. Almost at that exact moment, the artifact powering the barrier starts failing. The mages panic, but the assassins hit them before they can fix anything and kill them on the spot. Fiona senses something's wrong just before the garden explodes. Abel, meanwhile, had been pulled into a private room by the Lord of Whitnash. The room's soundproofed with a special item, so neither of them hears the attack outside. Abel assumes it's some serious political matter, but the Lord actually wants to discuss Lon's basic training course for new adventurers. He's heard it lowers rookie mortality and wants to bring the same system to Whitnash. Abel likes the idea. The Lord says Hugh's already agreed to share materials and instructors, but he also wants future teachers to take the course themselves first, so they know how to train rookies properly. While they talk, the mansion outside turns into a battlefield. Elsewhere in the city, Oscar's still out with his people. They ask why he's not eating, and he says he'd rather stay ready until Fiona gets back. They tease him for worrying too much, which stirs up old memories. Oscar grew up in a peaceful mountain village and used to have red hair. He was gifted with fire magic since childhood and loved using it to help people, whether it was helping the blacksmith control heat or lighting fires at home. One day, the blacksmith gave him his first sword, and Oscar felt like he was finally old enough to fight alongside the adults. His father took him hunting, but had him use a bow instead. That night, the village celebrated. Then word came that bandits were nearby. The villagers didn't have time to flee, so they tried to defend the place. At first they held the line, but the bandit leader was far stronger than expected. He broke through the defense, opened the gate, and let the rest pour in. Oscar was sent home to protect his mother. It made no difference at all. The bandit leader broke into the house, killed his mother, brushed off Oscar's fire without any effort, and nearly killed him too. His father arrived, but seeing his wife dead, lost it completely, got lured outside, and was killed as well. Oscar watched both his parents die right in front of him. He only survived because wolves closed in on the village and forced the bandits to retreat. The blacksmith found him afterward, told him to keep living, and later sent him running to the river when wolves surrounded the house. Oscar escaped by pure luck and got swept away by the current. A wealthy old man found him and took him in, comforted him, and gave him a second chance at life. Oscar stayed, studied, and asked to learn swordsmanship so he could grow stronger. A few years later, that life also ended in fire. He came home one night to find the mansion burning and the old man's family slaughtered. The killer was the same bandit leader from before. Oscar fought back and only managed to scar the man's face before being defeated himself. After that, his hair turned white, and he left with a single goal: revenge. Back in the present, the mansion is hit with fire attacks and descends into chaos. Fiona finds Conrad injured and tries to heal him, but he tells her to save her mana. The attackers have surrounded the place, and it's obvious now that he and Fiona are the real targets. He says they need to fight or die. Together they take down several enemies until Conrad hears a dangerous chant and warns her to raise her strongest barrier. She gets it up just in time to block Bullet Rain, a high-tier attack spell, but it drains her badly. Before they can recover, another enemy caster starts a second spell, combining earth and fire. Fiona figures out what it is before Conrad does. The ground beneath him starts shifting and heating up, so she shoves him out of the way seconds before the spell detonates. The blast launches her into the air. At that exact moment, Oscar arrives at the property. Seeing Fiona thrown skyward hits him like a nightmare repeating itself. Fiona spots him too and tells him to protect Conrad. Oscar immediately orders his people to cover the prince while he goes after her. On the beach, Niels and the others are waiting for Rio when they see a pillar of fire rise over the mansion. Then they notice someone falling. Niels runs and catches Fiona before she hits the ground. Eamon arrives right after, and once they recognize the princess, Ito warns there are still enemies nearby. Two attackers move in to finish the job. Eamon intercepts them. Ito blocks with a barrier and fires her new crossbow, and together they take both down. Now they realize this is way bigger than some random attack. If enemies are chasing Fiona all the way out here, nowhere nearby is safe. They start figuring out where to hide her. Then Oscar arrives and ruins everything. He sees Fiona lying there next to three unfamiliar guys and assumes they're the assassins. Eamon and the others see a dangerous white-haired mage bearing down on them and assume he's another attacker after the princess. So both sides gear up to fight completely the wrong people. When Abel finally steps out of the private meeting, he walks straight into the chaos. The mansion's on fire, people are screaming, and he immediately realizes the soundproofing kept him locked away while everything fell apart outside. While he's trying to process it, Conrad spots him. Elsewhere, Rio notices Fiona's flash of light in the sky but reads it completely wrong. He assumes it's just some flashy festival spell and feels a little let down when the glow fades. A second later, two hooded men slam into him hard, sending his food flying, and keep running. Rio's already annoyed since he waited forever for those snacks, but the pair seem suspicious enough to catch his attention. On the beach, Oscar advances on Niels, Eamon, and Ito, demanding they hand over Fiona. He assumes right away they're the enemy and starts hurling insults before attacking. Ito barely gets a barrier up in time, but Oscar's magic hits so hard it nearly crushes her. Another blast comes anyway. Edo blocks again, but the shield shatters and she collapses right after. Completely spent, Eamon plants himself in front of the princess as the last line of defense, already expecting to die. Then, an ice wall appears and swallows Oscar's next attack. Rio steps into the scene, sees his friends hurt, and his mood instantly turns cold. He asks Oscar what the hell he thinks he's doing. Oscar tells him to get out of the way since nothing's stopping him from reaching the princess. He attacks again, but Rio cuts the incoming magic apart with ice. Oscar realizes this new opponent is the real problem and stops holding back. He unleashes even heavier fire spells. Rio answers with layered ice. The clash explodes, but when the smoke clears, Rio's untouched. Then Rio starts pressing the attack. He sends waves of icicles down, forces Oscar on the defensive, and keeps the pressure on. Oscar responds with even stronger fire magic, including a spiraling flame attack that burns through one of the ice waves. But Rio just repositions, drops down inside a shell of ice, draws his blade, and closes the distance. Oscar meets him with a flame-wrapped sword, and the fight turns into a brutal clash of magic and steel. That's when Abel finally reaches them and shouts for both of them to stop. Rio doesn't care. He tells Abel to stay out of it, or get frozen too. Abel can tell from his tone that he's dead serious. So he tries a different angle. He goes straight to Oscar, identifies himself as a representative of the Lawn Guild, and explains that the boys protecting Fiona are adventurers from his city, not assassins. He says Oscar's concern makes sense, but this is a misunderstanding. Oscar starts to hesitate. Rio doesn't. He says if the conversation's over, he's ready to finish things with Oscar right now. Abel tells him to stop being an idiot, but Rio shoots back that he has no reason to forgive someone who hurt his friends. And when Oscar even hints he could freeze Fiona too, Oscar's self-control snaps, and he unleashes a massive fire blast across the beach. Rio douses the whole thing with water, turning the area into instant steam and rain. Then Rio asks Abel, again, if he can kill Oscar now. Abel finally says the one thing that actually gets through to him. If Oscar dies here, it becomes an international crisis, maybe even war. Abel steps between them and tells Oscar that Conrad sent him to guarantee Fiona's safety. Then he turns to Rio and tells him to stand down. Rio fires back, asking if Abel would be this calm if it had been Rihya who got hurt. Abel admits that even so, he still wouldn't choose war if he could avoid it. That answer pisses Rio off, but seeing that Abel won't budge, he finally backs down. He tells them to hand Fiona over, and Oscar, still wary, decides helping the princess comes first too. Later, standing on the beach, Rio thinks about how all of this started with a shipwreck and Abel. He looks at his injured friends and realizes just how much his life has changed. The next morning, everyone's back on their feet. Ato's especially glowing after learning it was Rihya who healed him. Rio calls that a decent enough ending. Abel, on the other hand, is exhausted, having spent the whole night untangling the political mess Rio nearly caused. Luckily, Conrad and Fiona accepted the explanation, and Oscar even apologized, though Rio's still not thrilled about it. Abel then tells Niels, Ito, and Amon that Fiona wants to personally reward them for saving her life. Rio, on the other hand, gets nothing, since officially he wasn't even part of the rescue. Back in Lawn, Sarah's getting more and more restless, waiting for Rio to come back. She's always lived comfortably on her own, but spending time with him messed with that a little. Now she keeps wondering when he'll return. One day, she walks into her favorite restaurant and finds him there. Her face lights up instantly. Rio notices her too and calls her over to sit. After eating, Sarah takes him to a hidden section of the library to show him a rare alchemy text she found. Rio's grateful and starts copying notes by hand. Sarah points out that if the original were on proper paper, he could have just used a transcription spell instead. Rio's completely floored to learn a copying spell even exists. Sarah laughs, since to her, that's about as basic as it gets. When he finishes, Rio asks a question that's been bugging him for a while. Sarah spends a huge amount of time at the library, and the fees aren't cheap. So how does she afford it? She explains she works for the local feudal lord, and that arrangement lets her use the place freely. Then she offers to show him the transcription spell in action. On the way there, they run into Abel leaving a shop. Both Abel and Sarah are surprised the other knows Rio. After Abel leaves, Sarah gets a little irritated and says something pointed to Rio. He's way too casual with Abel, but keeps a polite wall up around her. She wants that to change. Later, Rio finds Abel at the inn and reminds him of the dinner he promised after the dungeon rescue. Abel panics because he'd completely forgotten. Rio says he actually wants something else instead. Since his time at the dorm is almost up, he wants a house with a big yard where he can work in peace without anyone bothering him. So he wants Abel's help finding a place. Abel takes him to a real estate agent, but the man explains Rio can't buy noble land since he's still just a commoner. The agent does have one possible option though, a farm outside the city. Rio goes to check it out and likes it almost instantly. He buys it on the spot, without even bothering to negotiate. To Rio, it's just one more step toward the quiet life he's wanted all along. He has no idea. Things are only about to get bigger from here. That's it for today. If you're into anime recaps like this one, drop a comment down below. I read every single one. Check out this other video too, you're gonna love it. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.